March of the Machine, The Aftermath is about to release, and it is a very different set. It is more of an addition to than a set by itself. So there's only 50 cards in the set. Um, Being only 50 cards, there's only uncommons, rares, and mythics. There's no commons in the set. It is not meant to be played in limited at all. The booster packs that you buy will only have 5 cards in them, or you buy the collectors, which have 6. So every card in the set is meant to be constructed playable. Um, so as per usual, I narrowed it down to a top 10, which was a lot easier to do with only 50 cards. But again, the 50 cards are also quite a bit better than normally a whole set would be, being constructed playable. So let's just go ahead and dive in. As per usual, we're going to focus on standard. Um, and this is my list, so this is not a definitive list. This is based on my opinion alone, based on what I know about standard and how I would approach it. Um, and it is focused on standard mainly because there are some cards in this set that are really powerful for commander. I think we've got a few commander staples. If you would like for me to focus on that for a video, I can, but this was mainly for standard. So let's just go ahead and dive in with number 10. Number 10, I have Joel Rael, Voice of Zolfir. It's 2 green and a blue for legendary creature Human Druid. It's a 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target land you control becomes an XX green and blue bird creature with flying and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. It's still a land. Whenever a land creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. I think this is a really powerful card. The only reason I have it at number 10 and not higher is because I don't know exactly where it'll fit in yet. But it's very powerful because it generates a hasty creature with evasion every turn that could potentially be pretty powerful depending on how many cards you have in your hand, which in these colors are probably a pretty decent amount. And it just puts a clock on your opponent, and you keep reloading your hand, so you keep drawing cards every turn when you attack with this. Um, where I like this, the build itself is not really there yet in standard, but it might get there if you have like a draw 2 matters deck. So like Sultai, you run the Neodina and Zimone. You already have some value there. You got Shouldered, you got Gix's Puppet, you've got the 2-drop creature that draws an extra card each turn. You can really synergize a lot with those cards, just drawing cards and draining your opponent. If you want to put an extra clock on your opponent, that's where Joel Rail comes in, really attacking with those land creatures that also draw you that extra card per turn. So I really think that this can make that deck a solid deck that could potentially be be powerful against the meta or in the meta itself. So that's where I kind of see this kind of card going. If you want to play it more controlling, you can, where you have more of a band control deck, and this is just your win con. I think that's very powerful too. So I think you can go a couple different ways with this. But this by itself is just very strong, putting a clock on your opponent and drawing cards at the same time as a passive ability. That's really, really powerful. I like that a lot. And it can do it on the turn it comes out if you played pre-combat, which is really good as well. Number 9, I've got Gerina, Dauntless General, a white and a black for legendary creature Human Soldier. It's a 2/2. Sacrifice Gerina. Humans you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Humans, I think, is becoming a real deck. So right now it's not really tier 1 yet because aggro you tend to go for Azorius Soldiers, which is not 100% humans, or kind of more like your mono red. But I think humans is really becoming a deck. We've got a couple other human cards coming in this set that really bolster that creature type. Personally, I've been kind of experimenting with an Abzan humans deck already prior to this set coming out, so that I could play the new Thalia as well. And Celestia are just really good colors for humans, so Abzan it is. I really think Gerina will make that deck so much more powerful and so much harder to deal with for control, which is kind of where it struggles now. It is already really powerful against aggro, in my opinion, because you tend to outvalue a little bit, but it tends to be a little slower to build up your board. So against control, that struggles more, and that's where Gerina comes in. So that's why I put this in the top 10. I really think Abzan humans, potentially Orzhov, but I think Abzan humans is really going to be a deck after this set coming out. Number 8, we've got Calyx, Guided by Fate, a 1 green and a white for a legendary enchantment creature. It's a human druid, and it's a 2/2, and it has Constellation. Constellation, whenever Calyx, Guided by Fate, or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever Calyx or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this only once each turn. That's pretty powerful. Like Celestia enchantments has kind of been away for a bit, but it still has all the cards it needs to be very powerful. And occasionally you'll see somebody come out with like a powerful win streak with Celestia enchantments, and I really think that this will really possibly put that deck back on the map. One thing to note that kind of pushes this back a little bit is whenever a Calyx or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage. So not an enchantment creature, but an enchanted creature. But I've seen more lists where Celestia enchantments run like Audacity, um, or other enchantments to kind of help their creatures be a little stronger. But even if it's just Calyx, if you play that and you have the Catilda that can give it flying, that's a really powerful way to generate a powerful board state where you can start like copying your exile enchantments or other creatures that are enchantments that you can just increase your board state depending on what your opponent has going on. I think that's very powerful. I think that has a lot of value. Um, that this is a 2/2 is not that big of a deal because when it enters the battlefield, it already allows a +1/+1 counter to be put on a target creature, so you can put it on Calyx itself or something else. And that synergizes really well with some of the creatures that are already in Celestia enchantments, giving +1/+1 counters or getting +1/+1 counters themselves, and then Calyx as well, giving +1/+1 counters. That's just a lot of bolstering of that deck. So even if you don't go full Celestia enchantments and you have just a few enchantments in the deck and you go more to +1/+1 counter course with it, I think you can get a lot of value that way as well. So I don't think you'll see Calyx just in enchantment decks, but that's obviously where it wants to go and wants to shine. Number 7, the card that I cannot pronounce. Deification, 1 and a white, enchantment. As Deification enters the battlefield, choose a Planeswalker type. Planeswalkers you control of the chosen type have hexproof. As long as you control a creature, if damage dealt to a Planeswalker you control of the chosen type would result in all loyalty counters on it being removed, instead all but one of those counters are removed. So this is basically a 2-mana permanent that allows your Planeswalker, one of your Planeswalkers, if not more, to survive. Um, if you have, let's say, the Wandering Emperor, I feel like you can name it in a way where you can protect both your Wandering Emperor Planeswalkers. So in mono white, I can see this really becoming a thing, which the Wandering Emperor, the 6-mana one, was already really hard to deal with because you can only attack with one creature. Now you're going to have to get rid of the enchantment first before you can kill these planeswalkers. Really, the only workaround of this is if you have like a sacrifice effect, where it's like your target opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. Um, but other than that, deification is going to be a very powerful way to make your opponents deal with the enchantment first before they can deal with your planeswalkers, and that's painful because you don't want to leave an opponent's planeswalker on the board too long because they tend to take over the game. So that's where deification really comes in. Mono white is an obvious pick for this deck, but even in Zori's control for sideboard option to keep your Jace alive if you're in a mill strategy, being able to kind of protect your Jace for that moment where you really want to hit that mill option. That's where it's really powerful too, but I can see this going in multiple decks where Planeswalkers are a thing. If not in the main deck, then probably in the sideboard. But I would not be surprised if Mono White runs this in the main because they tend to run at least the 2 Wandering Emperors and possibly also an Elspeth. So Deification, really powerful card, really interesting. It's going to be hard to deal with Planeswalkers with this on the board. Number 6, Leyline Immersion for a 3 and a green enchantment aura. Enchant legendary creature. Enchanted creature has Ward 2 and tap, add 5 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast spells. So you can't activate abilities with it, which is fine. So why put this high? It's a 4-mana card that gives something the ability to tap for 5 and a Ward 2. That in itself doesn't necessarily sound great, but Legendary Matters is really becoming big. We have it in multiple colors now. There's the 5-color with Jorah or Jonah, Jorah, Joda, 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 and then you've got the Esper versions, of course. Now I'm starting to see Abzan come around. Um, so this would obviously not fit in Esper, but you could go 4-color. I've seen those versions as well. There's just a lot of variations of legendary decks that matter. Um, and I think this is going to be really powerful in that, especially with Rona. A lot more people are playing Rona in legendary decks because it just makes sense to, because it untaps every time you play a legendary spell. So put this on your Rona, tap it, play a legendary creature, it untaps Rona, you can tap it for 5 more mana. So there's just um, ways to generate a lot of mana quickly. If you want to go ahead completely nuts with it, you can even play Atraxa out pretty quickly. So you have your Rona on the board. Rona has Leyline Immersion. You tap Rona for maybe 2 or 3 mana, or for 5 mana. You only use it to play a legendary that has 2 or 3 mana on it. Untaps, the rest is floating, and you tap it again and you play your Atraxa out. So now, putting this high just to attach it to Rona seems a little silly, maybe, but I really think there's something there that's so powerful that it makes sense to put this high because of that. The synergy with Rona and Leyline Immersion is very, very, very good in Legendary Matters decks. But even if it's not Rona, using this to just get your Joda out the next turn as a little extra option there is very powerful. I really think that this card is broken with Joda, but good enough if you don't have Joda on the board to keep this in the top 10 for this set. Very powerful card. I like it a lot. Number 5. Filter Out. 1 blue for an instant. Return all non-creature, non-land permanents to their owner's hands. That's very powerful. So I've seen some discussion around this card already where people think that this might or might not be the best card in the set. I think it's kind of like right there in the middle of the top 10, so that's why I put it number 5. I think there's cards that are better than Filter Out. Why I put this in my top 10 is because I do still think it's very, very powerful. What makes this crazy is that it's an instant. It's not a sorcery. Most of these types of effects would be sorcery. Rivet's Rebuke is a sorcery. Um, and I know that there's Cyclone Rift. I think it's Cyclone Rift. Is that an instant or a sorcery? I don't remember. But still, this being an instant in standard right now is very powerful. So you can just do it at your opponent's end step, untap yourself, and do some crazy stuff. Why I don't have this at number 1 is just because I don't know exactly where it fits and against who right now in standard. Um, Obviously, you would think like, hey, this could put all planeswalkers back in somebody's hand. So like, somebody has Deification, a Filter Out would put the Deification and their planeswalkers back in their hands. So um, it's good there against, like, let's say you play against Grixis, they do like their their blood tokens and their treasures. You put all those back in their hands. That's also why this is going to be a huge card in Commander. Imagine your opponent playing wanting to play Dockside and just decide to put everything back in their hand, destroy all treasures with it. So Filter Out is really powerful there. But let's focus on Standard. Um, I could see this being played in the sideboard for Mono Blue. Mono Blue tends to just have like 1 or 2 creatures on the board and just control the rest of the board state. So if your opponent plays a lot of non-creatures, then having a Filter Out in as an option in your sideboard is really good. But I could also see this being played in like a Grixis mid-range because you can cycle your blood tokens or your Fable if you draw this when you don't need it. But when you do need it against like a mono white who has a bunch of enchantments on the board, you can really blow up their game and take over with your creatures because you do run plenty of those. So I could see it being really strong there. Um, you don't want to have this main deck in a lot of decks though, because if you aren't able to cycle this or you play against mono red, this is just a dead card. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily the best card in the set, but it definitely is very, very strong against a lot of strategies. Um, and I think there's a couple blue decks that want to run this for sure, if not in the sideboard or main board. Sorry, if not in the main board, then in the sideboard. But if you have ways to cycle this, like Grixis midrange, I could see this becoming a main deck card depending on how the meta shapes. Very powerful card for sure. Number 4, Blot Out for 2 and a black and an instant. Target opponent exiles a creature or planeswalker they control with the greatest mana value among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Very simple card, very much Soul Shatter, but with an exile effect instead of a destroy. That matters a lot in the current standard format where there's just so much reanimator, so much ways to bring things back. Just a very efficient 3 mana removal. I think is a super powerful. There's really not a lot to say about a card like this. Just very solid, strong removal. 3 mana for removal seems like a lot nowadays where everything is 1 or 2 mana, but being able to exile something with the greatest mana value, I feel like you're going to net more mana than your opponent, and it's really worth it because they're not going to be able to bring it back. So Blot Out, very powerful, very simple to put it high in the top 10. I don't really need to say much about this card. This is going to be ran main deck. Anything that runs black that wants to run a couple removal spells, I feel like they're going to run this. Um, and if you don't run it in the main deck, you'll definitely have it in the sideboard against like a Traxa and a Tali type decks, where you can just make sure that whatever day hits the board one time will not hit it again. Very powerful, for sure. I like this a lot. All right, we're down to the top three. We're going through this list pretty quickly, but I think so far, like I said, there's only 50 cards in the set, so the top 10 was getting to the top 10 was pretty straightforward. And I think these cards kind of speak for themselves in a lot of ways. So um, let's go ahead and go to number 3, which is Narset Enlightened Exile. For 1 and Jeskai, for 1 blue, red, white, we've got a legendary creature, Human Monk, and it's a 3/4. Creatures you control have prowess. Whenever Narset Enlightened Exile attacks, exile target non-creature non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. So this does a lot. So there's a couple things to really note when reading this card. It doesn't say other creatures you control have prowess, so that Narset gives itself prowess as well. Um, which means that if you cast a couple non-creature spells, once it attacks, you can copy potentially a pretty powerful spell, and you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So even if it's not in colors that you can produce, which could be because you can do it from a graveyard, not your graveyard, a graveyard. So play this against mono black and cast an Invoke Despair against them if you've cast 2 non-creature spells that turn. You probably finish the game because you might have a couple creatures on the board. They all get prowess, they all get +2/+2 until end of turn, and you cast an Invoke Despair. So this is a powerful top end for Jeskai spells, which has gotten a lot of support with March of the Machine and previous sets. So Narset prowess is already kind of becoming a deck. With Iconoclast, with the Jackal, I don't remember its name, that I put in my top 10 list for March of the Machine. Monastery Swift Spear, and just there's so much support now for Jeskai spells, Jeskai prowess, that it's very easy to generate a big board state with creatures. The ones that don't have prowess, like the Iconoclast and its tokens, they won't get prowess. Whatever Narset hits the board, you swing after you cast like 1 Play with Fire, and you copy a very powerful spell, and you just completely destroy your opponent. So I think a lot of people look at Narset and think like, oh my gosh, it's a great commander. Yeah, it's a great commander, but there's definitely the support to be very powerful in Standard as well. I think Jeskai spells or Jeskai prowess, however you want to call it, is definitely a deck. And Narset can push it to become a top tier deck. Very strong. Like the only thing that would push this over the top would give it ward. So if you have anything that can give your cards ward, great. But you can also just run some shore ups or some other protection spells because you're going to be in those colors anyway. So I really think Narset is going to make Jeskai spells a top tier deck. It's not just a commander card. Going to number 2. Herbwork Scavengers, 2 and a black for a creature spirit. It's a 2/2. Whenever Herbwork Scavengers enters the battlefield or attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on Herbwork Scavengers. It has flying as long as a card exiled with it has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Madness, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. All the things. Um, this might put mono black back on the map. Obviously, we already have Graveyard Trespasser, which is good. Gives a little bit of life, has ward. The only thing that this misses is the ward, so I don't know if this is better than Graveyard Trespasser or just different. Graveyard Trespasser tends to be better against aggro, but Herbwork Scavengers is going to be more aggressive. So I like this card a lot. The reason why I put it high is because it's played in a little bit more decks than some of the other cards that I've talked about. This can go in anything that's black aggro, wants some graveyard hate. Doesn't necessarily have to be a legendaries deck, just like black aggro or black mid range. This can really find play. Being able to, like, let's say you exile your opponent's shoulder, that suddenly it has Death Touch. You exile one of their angels, it has First Strike and Lifelink. This can really become powerful quickly. So it doesn't have ward. It's kind of a bummer because we have a lot of removal in the format. But otherwise, this thing would have been insane. So I still think it's really powerful. Hence why I put it at number 2. And especially once Graveyard Trespasser, I think some people still want to prefer Graveyard Trespasser because it's better against aggro. Um, but I think especially once Graveyard Trespasser rotates out, Herbwork Scavengers will see a lot of play. Um, it comes in most of the time as a 3/3. Unless there's nothing in Graveyard Dread, it'll come in as a 2/2. But if there's anything in the graveyard, it comes in as a 3/3, just like Graveyard Trespasser. But just being able to get all those keywords on it, this thing gets out of hand quickly. I like it a lot for that reason. All right, we're down to the top card in the set. Which card do I think is the best in the set? Um, I don't know if people are going to agree with this one, but it has so much potential to do crazy things, so that's why I put it here. Ob Nixilis, Captive Kingpin, 2 black and a red for legendary creature Demon, flying and trample on a 4/3. Whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Ob Nixilis, Captive Kingpin. Exile the top card of your library. Until your next end step, you may play that card. This does things, guys and girls. 4/3 Flampler is already pretty decent, but being able to get +1/+1 counters when an opponent loses exactly 1 life, that this thing is going to get big quickly. Um, it's not once per turn. It's not at the end of the turn. It is a as it happens. So this one deck that is severely underplayed, in my opinion, is Anvil. Anvil Sacrifice. Anvil Sacrifice is so good. Um, Currently, I have like a 70 or 80% win streak with it. I just don't play enough standard to rank up anymore. But anytime I take it to the ranked ladder, I win a lot, and I'm not that great of a player. Um, this could put Anvil from being top tier, like tier 1.5, to being tier 1 for sure, if it's not already there. Because you tap your Anvil, and you sacrifice an artifact that deals 1 damage, and this thing gets a +1/+1 counter. You get the exile card and play it until the end, until your next end step, which is really good. Um, but where this is crazy is if you put this, like, I think comboing off with this is really cool. You can do that. Um, but you can just keep it in like the Anvil build and go nuts with it. This is also really good in older formats, like put this with Cauldron Familiar, for example. It's really powerful that because it doesn't have to be exactly 1 damage. It's lose 1 life, so it could be a damage, it could be a life drain. That's typically not something we see. So Ob Nixilis is really powerful there. But what's cool is you've got the card All Will Be One. All Will Be One is the 5-mana enchantment that if a counter is put on any permanent you control, All-Will-Be-One deals damage equal to those counters to any target. So you have All-Will-Be-One on the board. You deal 1 damage. You put 1 counter on Ob Nixilis. It triggers All-Will-Be-One to do 1 damage you do to your opponent. It triggers Ob Nixilis to get the 1 counter, and you're on an infinite loop. So if you have Ob Nixilis, All-Will-Be-One, and you deal 1 damage, you win the game. It's an infinite loop, unless your opponent can disrupt it somehow. So with that, it's really powerful. This is, I think, the only infinite loop combo we have currently in standard once Ob Nixilis gets released. So Ob Nixilis all will be 1 and 1 damage. You win the game. So that's something to really keep in mind, that's a powerful combo there. So if Ob Nixilis is very potent because it bolsters one of the already strongest decks out there, and we've got an infinite combo with it. And by itself, it's a 4/3 flying trampler that can get some counters, which is already really good. Anytime you get a counter, being an exile card from the top of your library, that's a solid card advantage. There's just no downsides to this card. Like, everything about it is good. If you don't necessarily have the full Anvil setup to do a bunch of damage and go off with this card, if you do it only a couple times, it's already really worth it. But then if you have the All Will Be One and it finishes the game, that's it, guys. Like, it's such a powerful card. That's why I put it as the number 1. Like, sure, there's some stipulations there. There's always disruption possible, but what you can do with this makes this very, very powerful, and potentially broken. So we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how many people go off with this. Actually, I was not entirely sure about something. We currently do have a combo that finishes the game, and that's the Hidetsugu and Kairi combo. But that one, I think, is a little easier to interrupt than this one will be. Um, so potentially debatable. I don't know, but still, it's really cool to see this, and I think especially day 1 or 2, we're going to see a lot of combos with it, and then we're going to start seeing some answers, and then it'll probably just settle in the Anvil build. So anyway, that's my list. That's my top 10. Let me know, as per usual, what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe. I tend to do some Brawl videos now too. I'll probably, with the new set coming out, we'll do some standard videos alongside my typical card rankings. So again, like, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the new set coming out.